Good day everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm the Marvel Master and this is the first video in a series of videos, basically going over how I would make a Marvel Cinematic Universe. As the title says, today I will be pitching a Spider-Man trilogy to fit into my Marvel Movie Universe, or MMU for short. On screen you should be able to see a few blacked out rectangles, and these are the posters for the 7 projects that make up Act 1 of my MMU. If you go on to enjoy this video, leave a like and subscribe and comment your favourite Marvel character in the comments below. Kicking off the MMU would be Spider-Man Masked Menace, an origin movie for Peter, showing him getting his powers on a field trip to Oscorp, during which he overhears an argument between his science teacher, Dr. Kirk Connors, and the founder of Oscorp, Norman Osborn, who would be telling Connors that his research hasn't had any conclusive results, so he's pulling the plug on funding. Peter would be bitten, discover his powers, yada yada yada, but wouldn't use them responsibly, leading up to him not stopping a robber, and the same robber going on to shoot Uncle Ben. As Ben Parker died, he would impart the famous quote that, "With great power there must also come great responsibility." With a costume to protect his identity, Peter would hunt down the robber and beat him nearly to death, before realizing what he was doing and swinging away. Outside of Spider-Man stuff, Peter would be lab partners with Gwen Stacy, who is dating a jock in the school called Bobby Drake, who's a bit of a jerk to Peter at times. Kurt Connors would call in sick one day, leading to their science class instead being led by a teacher called Professor Miles Warren, and the school which Peter would go to would be Midtown High. Peter Parker would see an advertisement in the papers looking for photos of Spider-Man, and using a camera belonging to Uncle Ben, would take some photos to the Daily Bugle, where he would meet a larger cast of characters, including the editors-in-chief, J. Jonah Jameson and Robbie Robertson, Robbie's son Randy, who would be dating a girl called Betty Brant, who also works at the Bugle, and Eddie Brock, who is also there to submit photos of Spider-Man, who J. Jonah Jameson is labelling a menace. Around the midpoint of the movie, there would be a montage of Spider-Man taking down various villains such as Boomerang, Shocker, and Speed Demon, with various headlines such as Hero or Menace, which would culminate with Spider-Man listening in on a police radio and swinging to a crime scene, where out of an old warehouse would bust a massive reptilian monster, the Lizard. Spider-Man would try to take him down as he rampaged through the city, at one point tearing through a party hosted by JJJ to celebrate his son's return from space, but Peter would fail as Lizard disappears into the sewers. The next day at school, Peter would find Gwen in tears as Bobby has vanished, and, secretly a little bit happy, Peter would comfort her. J. Jonah Jameson would be furious about Spider-Man disrupting his son's big event, so would offer an experimental procedure to anyone who could help take Spider-Man down. One man would accept, Matt Gargan, and in this version, Matt Gargan would have been the robber who shot Uncle Ben and was nearly killed by Spider-Man. Everything would begin to culminate with Peter finding out that Kirk Connors is the Lizard, when finding a secret lab in the sewers with various vials marked antidote with a question mark, and equations on various blackboards, and then Kirk Connors would turn into the Lizard in the middle of a science class the next day, and Peter would have to suit up to take him down, with Gwen seeing him pull on the mask. Lizard would not be as big as last time, as Connors has altered the formula, but is now having uncontrollable transformations. Seeing this on the news, Jameson would get the procedure on Gargan to be rushed in order to send him out to capture Spider-Man. This would put Gargan in great pain, but he wouldn't realize until later that he couldn't take the suit off. He'd just be happy to be able to fight Spider-Man again, which he would do in Midtown High, trucking around police cars with his tail as the NYPD tries to get involved. Spider-Man would now be involved in a three-way battle against Scorpion and Lizard. Gwen would rush over to help him, and a very battered Peter would give her the incomplete formula and notes, and ask her to try and finish it while he tries to stop the two villains from basically destroying the school. Gwen would manage to finish the cure and get it to Peter, who would jab the Lizard, and Spider-Man would then fight Scorpion one-on-one. Peter would be losing big time, until he recognizes Matt Gargan's eyes, where his mask is cracked, and Peter would go berserk for the second time on Matt Gargan. And once again, Peter would be able to stop himself just before causing irreparable damage. The movie would end with Gwen essentially saying she can't be with Peter, with him being Spider-Man, but saying that she might be able to in the future, kind of. The post-credit scene would see a man in an office watching the fight at the school on his computer, and it would be revealed to be Norman Osborn. So overall, a bit different to the usual Spider-Man origin, and I hope you're okay with me making Matt Gargan the robber. But yeah, that would be the first movie in the MMU. The next movie, Sky's the Limit, would pick up a few months later in the summer holidays. Peter would go to the Daily Bugle to sell some photos, and would find the police there. Betty Brant would explain that J. Jonah Jameson is under scrutiny, as the experiment turning Matt Gargan into Scorpion had been traced directly to him. She would then give Peter a leaflet for an Oscorp internship. Randy would chip in and say that he's nowhere near smart enough, but he's sure that Peter could get in, and would even ask his dad to pull some strings with a contact that he has in Oscorp. Just to say, Aunt May would be in all three movies, and would impart lots of important wisdom to Peter. In this movie, she'd be very proud of Peter getting the Oscorp internship, and would say that Uncle Ben would be very proud as well. At Oscorp, Peter would meet a fellow intern, Felicia Hardy, who wouldn't pay him much attention, and they'd both work under Dr. Adrian Toombs, who's working on some new hover technology. Peter would also meet and befriend Harry Osborn when, being very impressed with Peter's work, Norman would invite him up to the top floors for dinner at one point. Later that night, Peter would be walking home when he spots someone sneaking around in a jewelry store. He would rush into an alley to get changed, and he'd be just in time to see the figure grappling up onto a nearby roof. He would chase the figure, who's revealed to be Black Cat, and he would instantly recognize her as his fellow intern Felicia Hardy, but she wouldn't recognize him at first. The two would fight, and Spider-Man would stay silent, not wanting to give away his voice, while Black Cat would tease and even flirt with him, definitely using the phrase "cat got your tongue" at one point. She would actually manage to win the fight by outwitting Peter and getting him caught up in his own web, leaving her to get away with her quarry, and seemingly disappearing without a trace. The next day, Peter would arrive at Oscorp to find Adrian Toombs furious, as Norman Osborn has unveiled his hover technology, and is using it as part of a contract with the government. He's muttering things such as, "Weapons, I'll show you weapons," and sends Peter away immediately. On his way out, Peter would see Felicia flirting with Harry Osborn, and would follow her as Spider-Man to find out where she lived. It turns out the reason she managed to get away and disappear so quickly the night before was that the building the duo ended up fighting on was right next to where she lived. At night, Peter would be waiting on her as Spider-Man. As she comes up from the fire escape in her costume, he would be standing there. In a deep voice, he would basically say that if she didn't return the diamond that she stole, he'd have to turn her over to the authorities. She would tease him a bit and say that he wouldn't really, and when flashing sirens went by, accompanied by some gunfire, she would tell him that he had somewhere else to be. With one final warning, he would go to follow the car chase, which is a van from a bank being driven by some crooks with Shocker standing in the back, firing out with a Tommy gun. Spider-Man would be swinging down to kick the van off the roads, when there would be a flash of fire, as the road in front of the vehicle melts along with the vehicle's front wheels, causing the van to get flipped over by its own momentum and Shocker to be thrown out. Spider-Man would quickly string a web between two buildings to catch the villain, before turning to see Human Torch land by the police, who are thanking the flaming hero. Yes, the Fantastic Four exist in this universe. Human Torch would start to fly off, but Spider-Man would catch up and swing alongside him, asking how to get the public to like him. Human Torch would shrug midair, but say something like, "I personally think you're doing okay, kid," before flying off. The next day, Adrian Toombs would not be at Oscorp, and Peter and Felicia would instead be working under Bentley Whitman, who has been given control of the project, only for them to find out that most of the equipment has disappeared. Whitman would go to Norman to report this, and at this moment, Felicia would reveal that she knew that Peter was Spider-Man, and that if he revealed her secret, she would reveal his. Peter would be very taken aback, but Felicia would laugh and invite him to the cinema. That evening, Peter would stay back late at Oscorp to finish off a project, when an alert would go off coming from the penthouse. He would suit up as Spider-Man, and run up the side of the building to find a massive hole in the side of the building, more specifically Norman Osborn's gigantic study. Vulture would loom over Osborn, gigantic feathery wings spread wide, while Norman stands there impassive. Norman would tell Adrian to stop this silliness, which would enrage Vulture, and he'd be about to attack Norman when Spider-Man would shoot web strands at each wing and manage to basically fling Vulture out of the building, though the momentum would pull Spider-Man with him. This would lead to an aerial battle where Peter is hanging from Vulture while they fight in the air, and both of them are trying to beat the other up while also not fall out of the sky. Peter would manage to tie up Vulture's wings and would basically overload his web shooters in order to create a web parachute. The post-credit scene would see a shadowy figure watching the news of Spider-Man taking down Vulture, and then looking up at a board, where newspaper clippings and images of Lizard and Scorpion are pinned up. As you can see, there would be a one-movie gap between the first two Spider-Man movies, and the same is true for the third. The third movie, Spider-Man vs. the Sinister Six, would bring my favourite supervillain team to the big screen for the first time. As you will see, the team is not composed of the original 6 members, but personally I think that's okay, as the team is still comprised of 6 of Spidey's very well-known villains, and will be headed by my favourite Spider-Man villain, who I think is kind of synonymous with the Sinister Six. That is, of course, Dr. Octopus. The movie would open with a bank robbery being carried out by both Shocker and Electro. By using the sprinkler system in the bank and making the villains accidentally blast each other, Spider-Man would be able to take them down fairly easily. Peter would still be at his Oscorp internship, and at one point Norman would invite him up to his office and offer him a future job at Oscorp once he has finished high school. He would also mention that he knows Peter is a friend of Spider-Man's, and would like to have a proper meeting with Spider-Man at one point to thank him for saving his life and offer him something. So that evening, Spider-Man would meet Norman in his office. Like with Felicia, Spider-Man would deepen his voice and try to use it as little as possible when talking to Norman, but, unlike with Felicia, Norman would not figure out who Spider-Man was. Norman would thank Spider-Man and offer him a new suit, which is basically the Iron Spider suit but black and green instead of red and gold, and with an Oscorp logo on the chest, and basically say he could have it if he became an Oscorp employee. Spider-Man would refuse, and Norman would say he understands, but that he wants to show Spider-Man something. The hero would agree, though a bit suspiciously, and would be shown some security footage of an Oscorp facility being raided by a shadowy figure who is causing chaos, and it's revealed to be Doc Ock. Norman would say that he was a former employee who sabotaged an experiment and ended up stealing some very powerful weapons, and that he is now periodically robbing various Oscorp-owned labs and stealing various materials that could be used to make a dangerous bomb. Again, Spider-Man would be suspicious, knowing how Norman betrayed Adrian Toomes and, to some extent, Kurt Connors as well, but would agree to watch the facility that Norman thinks Otto Octavius will attack next. Peter would have to cancel a date with Felicia, who we would have seen at various parts of the movie, but she would track him down to where he's watching the facility one afternoon, and the two would have a picnic. It would be interrupted, however, when there's a commotion as Doc Ock attacks the building, but Spider-Man and Black Cat team up and manage to stop him before handing him over to the police. In prison, a tentacleless Doc Ock would call a meeting with some of the other prisoners: Kurt Connors, Matt Gargan, Adrian Toomes, Max Dillon, and Holmes Schultz. Matt Gargan would still be inside his suit, but the tail wouldn't be attached, and Max Dillon would have a neckband stopping his powers. The rest would all just be in prison jumpsuits and such. Doc Ock would then explain how everyone there has a reason to hate Norman Osborn and Spider-Man, though at the mention of Spider-Man, Connors would look like he wanted to say something but would decide against it. Electro would have been a former Oscorp employee, like Vulture and Doc Ock, and Doc Ock would tell Scorpion that Oscorp was behind the procedure that fused his suit to him. Shocker would ask why he would hate Norman Osborn, and Doc Ock would pause and say that he didn't mean for him to be there. He'd basically just followed Electro, who's his friend. Scorpion would ask how they'd bust out, and Doc Ock would smile and tell everyone to step back. His tentacles would then crash through the wall and attach themselves to his waist, and he would rise up and tell the others to follow him to a place where he can get them all new and upgraded equipment, as well as promising Kurt Connors a way to control his transformation willingly. Herman Schultz would have been knocked out by a piece of flying rubble when the wall exploded, but no one would notice in their rush to leave. We would then see the five arrive at a warehouse where they would be outfitted with upgraded equipment. For example, Vulture's suit in the previous movie would match his original outfit in the comics, whereas his new one might align more closely with the MCU version. Doc Ock would hand Kirk Connors a vial, saying that it would allow him to change into the lizard, but still keep his mind in his new form. Doc Ock would then pick up a different vial and smile sinisterly. The equipment he had been stealing had not been for a bomb, that had just been a front. He had actually been stealing equipment in order to make these upgraded suits for the others. The next day, Peter would ring Felicia, but there would be no response. He would try again to no avail. Then he would see a news broadcast showing Dr. Octopus holding Felicia hostage in his tentacles and telling Spider-Man that in the video there are various clues to where she is. Peter would decipher it to be the Oscorp facility that Doc Ock had attacked, which had been temporarily abandoned after the attack. He would arrive there and find himself surrounded by the 5 villains who escaped prison. Doc Ock would tell him that they are the Sinister Six, and that Spider-Man may have defeated them on their own, but that together they are unstoppable. Peter would ask if Otto could count before asking where Felicia was, only for her to step out of the shadows. "My niece played her part very well, didn't she?" Dr. Octopus would say, and Felicia would look at the floor, as Peter stared at her with a look of betrayal, so strong she could tell it from under his mask. Doc Ock would even say that she told him who he was, and then would sneer, "Harry Osborn." The Six would start to attack Spider-Man, who would have been taken aback by the Harry Osborn comment, who had dodged a few attacks only to be smacked by a tentacle from Doc Ock, and from then on the attacks would keep on hitting and connecting. Doc Ock would leave the other 5 to take care of Spider-Man while he went to go and deal with Norman Osborn. Battered and bruised, Peter would notice Black Cat standing back slightly, but also that Lizard seems to be pulling his punches. Peter would whisper, "Felicia," only to be blasted in the back by Electro, who would laugh. Felicia would then say it's enough, and Scorpion would turn on her and ask if she wants to suffer the same fate as her boyfriend, who would turn back to Spider-Man and raise his tail high above his head to dish out the killing blow, while Vulture holds Peter in place. But as the tail came down, a large reptilian hand would grab it and stop it from killing Peter. "No," Lizard would say in a gravelly voice, the first time he's spoken as Lizard. "The cat is right. We're not killers." "You might not be," Electro would say, "but we are." This would essentially lead to Black Cat and Lizard fighting the other 3 present members of the Sinister Six, with Felicia telling Peter to go. Spider-Man would barely be able to stand, but would manage to get himself to Oscorp, where police are surrounding the base of the building. Helicopters would circle the top, spotlights shone on Doc Ock and Norman Osborn, who are on the roof. Peter would haul himself up the side of the tower, and would stagger to Norman's office to where the new suit is. We would cut to Doc Ock and Norman Osborn on the roof, where Doc Ock would basically have his back turned on a Norman, who's clutching his arm, his teeth gritted in pain. Doc Ock is holding an empty syringe in one hand, while he knocks the helicopters out of the sky with his tentacles. With the helicopter spiraling down, Spider-Man would burst out of the roof door and smash into Otto in his new Iron Spider costume, and the two would fight, tentacle on mechanical arms. At one point, Harry Osborn would run up through the same place Spider-Man came from, and would run over to his dad. Doc Ock would look at him in surprise and then back at Peter. He would realize that Felicia had lied to him and would hurl Harry off the building. Spider-Man would leap off to save his friend, and basically catch him and drop him off on another building, before hastily going back up to fight Doc Ock, who is starting to climb down Oscorp Tower. Doc Ock and Peter would fight on the side of it, before Doc Ock threw Spider-Man into the building, and the fight continued inside. Otto would say that he doesn't care who's under the mask, and that he's glad it's not Harry, because he'd prefer Spider-Man to be nameless to him. Even in his new suit, Peter would still be overwhelmed, and would only be saved by Norman Osborn, who would have staggered down the stairs and jabbed Otto in the neck with a taser, stunning him and frying part of his harness. Doc Ock would scream as the harness would begin to steam, giving Spider-Man the chance to incapacitate him. The post-credit scene here would see Norman having nightmares about Spider-Man and the Iron Spider Oscorp suit, which, by the way, Peter would have left at Oscorp, and Norman talking to Peter, and then him talking to Spider-Man, and it would end with a high-pitched cackling as Norman wakes up and his pupils contract. I hope you enjoyed this video. In the next video in this series, I will be revealing 3 of the other movies in Act 1, which, as kind of hinted at earlier, are Fantastic Four movies. As for what the final project is, well, you'll have to wait and find out. Thank you for watching, have a good day, and ta-ta.